We appreciate them. Doug and Sue Butterfield did all the flower arrangements and decorating of the place, and I think that's really great what they do. Jack and Dr. Elwood take care of photographing and recording the events. And on the snacks, you have Bob, Doug, and Sue keeping us fed. So let's give them all a round. And Sheila is ready to tell us how the women really direct the battles.
All right, I guess you can hear me now? Yes? So we shall go. In March of 1776, Abigail Adams wrote a letter to her husband John and said, quote, "I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." How about that? And so, reading that and so many other things began my pursuit of writing about the ladies. At the time of the American Revolution, as you very well know, women did not have any status. They had very few things that they could do. Basically, they were homebodies. They married, they took care of the children, they did the knitting, the weaving, the churning of butter, the teaching of housekeeping skills to their daughters, the healing, because there were very few, of course, of physicians that were around. And so their multitasking, can I use that word, perchance, in the 18th century was a little bit different than we look at it today. At 22 Adair Street in Charleston, South Carolina, lived Anna and Charles Elliott when Charleston fell to the British on May 12, 1780. She was a woman that really lived out loving her neighbor. Whether her neighbor was in prison where the British had put him, or whether they were sick from wounds that the British had put on him, and so many other things, the looting and all that we don't think about quite as much when it comes to an occupied city. She was the one that was there with the chicken soup and was very welcomed because of that. And it was interesting as I read a little bit about her story. She visited the prisoners. She went to the new powers that be and got better provisions for the prisoners, all those kinds of things. She made it a point to do. One afternoon, she was walking in her own garden with one of those British officers, a man that did not exhibit a lot of kindness in his demeanor as a conquering hero. And he saw a flower, and he pointed it out to her, and he said, "What is that, madam?" And she looked at it, and she said, "Oh, that's the rebel flower." And he seemed a little bit taken back, and he said, "And why is it called the rebel flower?" She looked him straight in the eye, and she said, "Because it always flourishes most when trampled upon." I'll bet he probably shut his mouth at that point. I believe he might have. But I think it's amazing that she said it so sweetly. She said it so sweetly. She really did. From the lowlands to the upcountry, as the British moved further into our state, the women also took a stand against the British. And I want to tell you the stories of a few of them right now. Jane and John Thomas married in 1740 and moved from Pennsylvania to South Carolina in 1749. They first settled on Fishing Creek, and then they moved to Fair Forest Creek in the southern section of Spartanburg County, what is now called the Camp Crop area. They were a respected couple, Scotch-Irish in background. John was elected a magistrate, and that, of course, sealed his position in the community with favor. And then he was elected the captain of his militia company. As the families began to choose sides for and against British occupancy and their continued British rule, he organized a Whig militia called the Spartan Regiment in 1775, and he was immediately elected colonel. Most of the men were members of the Fair Forest Meeting House. It was only a few months later until the Spartan Regiment was called into active service. And that was at a battle that we heard about yesterday, the Battle of Sullivan's Island. So there they were, right in the very beginning. Hostilities, we know. We had the Tories coming in, destroying people's land, robbing the land, all those things that they did, and there were skirmishes. And I believe, George, was it you yesterday? Someone was saying yesterday that battles were sometimes individual, you know? Not just on a battlefield, not just in a skirmish across a river or something like that, but they were also sometimes individual, and that's where the Civil War part comes in, and the Revolutionary War in our state. As people tried to pay back debt, people that had been harassed by their neighbors, or they felt like they in some way had been outwitted by their neighbors, there started to be some very settling in of accounts to be done. Local Tories heard about the fact that Governor John Rutledge, about a year before, we're still in 1780, had sent different kegs of gunpowder and munitions around to the people that he trusted up in the upcountry and across the state. The Thomases were one of those groups that were sent these munitions. And so it's interesting how that panned out for the Thomases. And I'd like to do a little bit of quoting here from the historian and genealogist Alan Cornwell. And she said, quote, Colonel Thomas and part of the Spartan militia were all fighting in Charleston, while about 25 of the Spartan regulars under the command of Captain John Thomas, Jr., were guarding the ammunitions and arms in and near the homestead. Tending the home fires were Jane Thomas, 3 of her daughters, and her youngest child, William, who was too young to serve in the Spartan Regiment. As Tory Colonel Patrick Moore and 150, one account records 300 men marched toward the house. Captain Thomas and his men gathered as much of that ammunition as they could carry and rode off to hide it in another place from the Loyalists. Remaining in the home to create a diversion of sorts were Jane, her daughters and son, and her son-in-law, Josiah Culbertson, who was Martha's husband. Jane and her children formed a production line and started reloading for Culbertson as the firing began. They did it as fast as their hands could fly, and if you watch someone loading a rifle, it can be slow work. But they had several hands working on it. They moved, Culbertson moved from rifle shot slot to rifle slot all around the log cabin. You've probably seen those little strips that's cut into the walls so that they could get those rifles out there and make a difference. Anyway, they kept up a steady barrage of fire, or it seemed like that to the Tories. This is one man firing, ladies and gentlemen, against 150 to 300 that were trying to get in the house. So, The gunfire was so fast that they really started thinking, this is the Tories, that the Patriot Guard had not left. They were still in there. They were convinced. They would never believed it, that it was just one person. And then as the Tories began a final assault on the log cabin, I think they could sort of feel in the cabin that this was going to be it. They were not probably going to make it. The timing was not good, etc. And Jane, I can just see her. You picture it. She picked up Josiah Cole's sword. She slammed it up in the air, opened the door to her log cabin, and went out there brandishing and daring those soldiers to come any closer. Can you imagine? One woman, all those Tory militia, they were intimidated. And would you believe they left? They left because of a woman brandishing a sword at them. This bold woman had beautiful black hair, was considered a beautiful woman during this time, black eyes and a fair complexion. But at that particular moment, it was her audacity that turned the tide of that little foray there in the upstate. The district around them continued to be badgered by the Tories. They pillaged, they burned, they stole, they did all those things that we know that it did, trying to get people to go to their side. I don't think they ever got the picture that that was not the way to win friends and influence people. But they just kept on doing it. Jane and her neighbors, these Patriots, never stopped being the kind of people that they were. On July the 11th, 1780, John Thomas and two of his sons, her husband, John Thomas, and two of their sons, had been captured, and they were in the jail at 96. It's about 60 miles from their home. Jane chose that particular day to visit them, July 11th. While there, she heard two Tory women in conversation, and one of them said, I heard that tomorrow night the Loyalists intend to surprise the rebels at Cedar Spring. Well, that was all Jane needed to hear. Who was there? Her son and 60 of that particular militia regiment. They were there. So she immediately jumped on her horse and headed in that direction, knowing that lives depended on her and them knowing who was headed their way. She swam her horse across the flooded Enoree and Saluda rivers. Delivering her warning, she kept on going. Well, of course, when they got this warning there in the camp, decisions had to be made. Do we flee? Do we stay? How do we fight? All those things. Well, they decided a little trickery was in order. And so they built up the fires there in the camp. They rolled the bedrolls together. And so it looked like everybody was sleeping there in the camp. And all the soldiers went into the woods around the place. Well, here come the Tories. They saw, looked in, had their, forward guard looking in to see what was going on. Thought everybody was sound asleep, piece of cake. So they started rushing in, and it only took one barrage of shot from the Patriots to take them out. And so that came to be known as a battle. Might not have seemed like a battle, but it was a battle of Cedar Springs. Jane Black Thomas lived until April the 16th, 1811, and she was steadfast in her commitment to the United States the whole time. Her obituary in the Carolina Gazette, I think we can tell a lot about people sometimes from their obituaries, and hers said, she steadfastly refused to drink any tea after the Revolutionary War commenced, saying it was the blood of some of the poor men who first fell in war. She was committed. No doubt about that. And now I want to tell you a little bit about another one in the upstate in York County. In 1765, William and Martha Bratton, along with their extended family, moved to a new acquisition from Rowan County, North Carolina. They purchased the land grants and settled side by side, as many Scotch-Irish did. They moved as clans, they stayed with the kin, and made their own settlements there. They became part of the new acquisition community and joined the Bethesda Presbyterian Church, which is still there today. The Bratton family brought little with them. As many of the settlers, we know that they just came with little or nothing. But they did, even though they didn't have those earthly goods, I think it's interesting that they brought that strong allegiance to God, to family, and to freedom. And that's what I've seen in many of these stories of our ancestors here. Martha's husband, William, and his militia, he was the captain of the new acquisition militia. They were miles away with Thomas Sumter's camp in the summer of 1780. I know you realize that year of 1780 was just full of engagements, of skirmishes, all those kinds of things. So Martha was in charge of the family, of the farm, of bringing in the wheat, of all those different things that she was in charge of. And I think that's something else that has just made me feel so strongly about these women, that when the men went off to war, they were left with it all. Whether it was their children, whether it was the cooking and the cleaning, whether it was the cows and the horses and the pigs and the farmland or whatever, but they did it. They took over and they did it. Strong women. All right, there is William gone. She is there with their 6 children. They kept hearing stories of how a man by the name of Captain Christian Pug, a Tory militiaman who's from Philadelphia, he was a lawyer, and for some reason that nobody seems to be able to find out, he hated the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, just pure T, hated them. And so he had been given orders to push them back as far as he could. And in doing that, he destroyed mills, he destroyed houses, he destroyed churches, he destroyed homes in that whole section. He just made war on the new acquisition. Really had house-to-house raids that were amazing with his men. So, on this day in July, Captain Huck, his British soldiers, the Green Dragoons that were with him, and the Tory militia of over 100 men galloped up the road to Martha's home. Everyone was in the wheat field because it was very necessary for them to get that wheat in a certain amount of time. And the wheat was necessary for both the livestock, of course, and for the family. So it was a very necessary job. Martha decided that she needed to get word to Sumter's camp about what was getting ready to transpire and what had already transpired in her neighborhood. And she sent one of their slaves, a man by the name of Watt, to the camp to tell the leadership there. Well, before long, that group was right there in front of her home. They were not only in front of her home, they were up on her porch. Her young son, 8-year-old William, was there beside her. And of questions, just zooming at her, right and left. Where's your husband? Where's the militia group? Where? She said, I don't know. And there are some accounts that say that she said, I don't know. If I did know, I wouldn't tell. Now, I don't know that she said that or not. That's sort of, might be part of the tale, but it could have happened. Well, as I said, they'd just been out in the wheat fields. I've never used one of these. Okay, it's a reaping hook. Some of you might have had that pleasure in bygone eras of using a reaping hook out in the fields to cut whatever needs to be cut down. But this one is what she had been using. that was behind her on a nail there on the porch. One of those Tories grabbed Martha by the arms, grabbed the reaping hook by his other hand, and he put it right here to her throat. And he said, "No, you tell me where your husband is." This woman refused to give him that information. I'm being very careful. It's short. And of course, with that, another Tory, a man by the name of John Adamson, that you might have heard of, that was from Camden, he took, I guess, it all into his own hands. And he knocked the reaping hook from this unknown Tory's hand, knocked him off the porch, and said something similar to the fact that we do not make war on women. He saved a life. In a word, he saved it. And why, we don't know, but he did. Interesting how the rest of that evening turned out. Captain Huck came into the home, demanded dinner, wanted dinner for not only himself, for his other officers. Well, what do you do? What do you do? Talking about Rebecca Mott last night. She did the same thing. The enemy's there in your home and they want to eat. She fixed it. She fixed it. And the legend goes that she thought about putting a little bit of, or a lot of poison in the stew that she was making that afternoon. Because she was an herbalist and she knew about the plant. She knew what to do and that kind of thing. And then the rest of the story with that as part of the background is the fact that she was afraid of the ramifications, the repercussions that might come up for children, and so she decided not to. So they ate, and I understand they ate well. And the thing about it is, it makes me think, they ate at the same table that she and her children and husband were used to sitting. So she fed the enemy at her family table. All this time, Watt had found Sumter's camp. That's the good thing. And 133 of the militia that were with Sumter, that were under William Bratton, made their way that night back to their own environs. As I understand it, it was a clear night, lots of moon, shining, etc., but they were headed home, and they were headed to defend their homes. I don't think they probably needed as much light as they had, that maybe Providence provided for them. But they got there under the leadership of William Bratton, John McClure, Andrew Neal, and Edward Lacey. They were going to protect their families. The next morning, every militiaman there was given the orders to every man your own command. And I think we know what that means. It was just do whatever the next thing is. They took the sentries out. They realized that Huck was in the house, the Williamson house, and they knew that they had to get rid of the militia around him first. And so about that time, some of the ones that had gotten closer to the house saw that they saw Huck in his white nightshirt with his sword, this time brandishing his sword. They saw him headed for his horses. He got some of his closer men with him, and of course, who was the target at that point? It really was that man. And he was taken out by a man by the name of James Carroll, one shot, got him down. Which really, there was a lot of celebrating after that in the whole community. The enemy had been vanquished. He was not going to make war on their homes anymore. Interesting about that, I said a while ago that the man that saved Martha's life was a man by the name of John Adamson. He was wounded in the battle. And some people gathered around him, and one person, they started talking, called William Bratton over and said, "We understand that this man might have tried to accost your wife." And, well, red flags, yes, red, for sure, seeing red, he was at that point. And then another one said, "No, he saved her life. He saved her life." So William Bratton called his wife to come over from the farm, and she told her husband what he really did. And she took in that particular day after the battle both the enemies and the friends to her home. They set up the hospital with, on the porch of her home, they set up on the lawn, all those places where she could tend both sides of the army. Another brief story about Martha. You know, I talked about those kegs of ammunition a while ago. Well, the Brattons were one of those groups that got the ammunition also. So in August, after this Battle of Huck's Feet on July 12th, another group of Tories decided that they would take care of that ammunition that they had, that gunpowder that the Brattons had. And so it's interesting, Martha got word that this was going to happen. She immediately got on a horse, went to destroy the gunpowder, fired a shot, explosion. The militia were right behind her. Lots of firing going on with that smoke from the explosion. Well, two of the men captured her immediately. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, as the saying goes. And so the captain that was over this, he said, "What man did this, and what are you still doing here? Where is he?" She said, "I did it. She owned it, as we would say today. She wanted them to know that even as a woman, that she had destroyed something that they really wanted. Martha was willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice, as all these women were. I think we need to realize that they were willing to step up to the plate and take whatever was thrown at them. On July the 12th, 1839, there was a celebration of Huck's defeat at Brackensville, and our youngest son, John, who was still alive at that point, made this toast, and I thought it was very telling. Quote, "To the memory of Mrs. Martha Bratton, in the hands of an infuriated monster, with the instrument of death around her neck, she nobly refused to betray her husband in the hour of victory. She remembered mercy, and as a guardian angel interposed in the behalf of her inhuman enemies. Throughout the American Revolution, she encouraged the Whigs to fight on to the last, to hold on to the end, honor and gratitude to the woman and heroine who proved herself so faithful a wife, so firm a friend of liberty." Strong words, strong words. And one other heroine that I'd like to share a little bit about is Kate Berry, Catherine Moore Berry of Walnut Grove fame. She moved from North Carolina into South Carolina with her parents, Charles and Mary Moore, in 1762. Again, another Scotch-Irish Presbyterian family. They set up Anderson Mill. They set up the church there, Tiger River Presbyterian Church. And interestingly enough, Charles Moore set up the first school in Spartanburg County, first public school for all the 12 families that moved down from North Carolina with them. And another interesting point with that, he believed in educating women. So all his daughters were there in the school, and the others were invited to come too, which was a different kind of look at education here in the South. Margaret was the oldest child. She was born in 1752. And if you think about it, oldest daughters, I happen to be an oldest daughter. Of any other oldest daughters in here? A lot rides on the oldest daughters. Yes, just saying. They get a lot of the responsibility. And it was the same in her household. Things just really haven't changed when you look at them. But Charles Moore was proud of his home. He was proud of his school that he started, all these things. And when Kate was 15, she married a neighbor, 21-year-old Andrew Berry. And for